We begin today's shiur in the middle of the Omid. You'll see a Mishnah, 22 lines from the top of the page. On the side, under the Nosei Mivneh heading, a Nosei, a topic, and Mivneh, structural note, you'll see that we've dashed, underlined in the Mishnah, and we've noted Gimel Dugmois. There are three examples. Shel Loi Kosav Lo Dvorim Horigilim Lofia B'Ksuba. If the husband did not write into the Ksuba document three different things that regularly appear in the document, what happens? And a second point, Nishbeis Oy Loksa. If, let us say, the wife was taken captive or took ill, Hayim habal yochol legarsha v'lo seis lo ksuba v'hi tetapel b'atzma. Can a husband divorce her and pay her the ksuba that's due to any woman that a husband divorces, and then she will take care of herself? In other words, she'll redeem herself, or she'll take care of her medical bills. Now the Mishnah. Lo kosav lo ksuba. A man marries a woman and doesn't write the ksuba document. Besula geiva mosayim valmona mona. A virgin marriage, she will be entitled to receive 200 zuz upon either her divorce or becoming a widow. And a almona, this is a woman who had been married before, and it's now her second marriage, mona, she will receive 100 from the second husband. Mipnei shehu t'nai basin. They receive these amounts respectively, even though they're not written into the document, because that is a built-in condition, we'll call it a court condition, that upon which marriages are predicated. So that even without it being written, it's understood that that is owed to the women. Kosav lo sode shove mona tachas mosayim zuz. A man writes over to his wife that she will get a particular field instead of a field that's worth 100 mona. Correction. A field that's worth 100 zuz, mona is 100 zuz, and it is in lieu of the 200 zuz that she deserves. V'lo kosav lo, and he doesn't add the following clause: Kol nechosim de'isli achroim l'ksubosech, that all the property that I have stands as a guarantee to compensate you for your ksuba. Chayav, he's obligated anyway. Shehu t'nai bezdin. In other words, the man essentially defined a field worth 100 zuz when she has 200 zuz coming to her, and he has other properties. She ultimately will have a right to collect the balance from his other properties, even if he didn't specifically or explicitly write in that my other properties are bound to the ksuba debt that is owed to you. And once again, this is a T'nai Bezdin. It's a built-in court condition that one's properties are bound, or if you say, you can say she has a lien upon his properties toward the value of her ksuba. Lo kosav lo im tishtaboy afrikinoch v'osvinoch li into. If he doesn't write this clause, that if taken captive I will redeem you and return you unto me as a wife. Uvekohenes, if he happens to be a Kohen married to this woman, once a woman married to a Kohen is taken into captivity, she can no longer return to her husband because of the strong suspicion that she was party to immorality under the control of the captors, and a wife of a Kohen is not allowed, even if she's raped, is not allowed to continue living with her Kohen husband. So in the case of a Kohen marriage, the clause would read that if you are taken into captivity, I will redeem you, and ahadrinoch lemedintoch, and I will return you to your country. In other words, you'll go back home. Chayav. The husband is obligated, even if he doesn't indicate in writing that he obligates himself to redeem her. Shehu Tanai Bezdin. This too is a guarantee, a condition upon which marriages are predicated. So he is obligated even without it being formally written in. Nishbeis Chayav Livdosa, a woman who is taken, the wife of a man who is taken into captivity, the husband Chayav Livdosa, he is obligated to redeem her. V'im Omar, if he should declare Harei Gita Uksubasa V'tivdes Atzma, I behold am divorcing her, and there is the ksuba debt that I owe her, let her collect that and redeem herself. Eino Rashoy, a husband is not allowed to do that. Very simply because beforehand he was initially obligated to redeem her by the very fact that they were married. The obligation to redeem her, we'll say the financial aspect, the debt that he owes to paying the ransom, set in before his, let's say, his decision to divorce her. So he can't circumvent that financial obligation to redeem her. So he can't offer this alternative. Loksa, his wife took ill, and that arouses medical expenses. Chayav l'raposa, he has to pay for those bills. And halachically speaking, the refuah, Rashi adds very importantly, is considered like mizonos. It's like considered the daily obligation of a husband to feed his wife. Omar, now upon her taking ill, he says, Harei gita uksubasa terapes atzma. I want to divorce her, I'll pay her ksuba, and with that money, let her tend to her own medical bills. Rashoy, he is allowed to do that. Very simply because you're dealing with a woman who is currently receiving mizonos, like any regular wife receives mizonos. In this case, the mizonos appears in the form of pills and medical treatments. That's all under the rubric of mizonos. And just like any husband has a right to divorce his wife, even though up till that point he was feeding her on a daily basis, one day a husband decides to divorce his wife, he can do that. Likewise over here, he divorces his wife, and he's not obligated to support his divorced wife. So in this case, in contrast to the case just before with the nishbeis, in this case he is allowed to divorce her and tell her to pay for her own expenses from the ksuba. Of course, I'm sure that this might sound very callous and an unfortunate situation. We're not here to make social statements, but rather we're here to analyze the letter of the law. Beyond that, of course, one has to consider other aspects in each one's personal behavior, but as far as the general letter of the law is concerned, the Mishnah states the two examples and their contrasting rulings. The Gemara asks Moni, who is the author of our Mishnah? On the side we have a nosei, a topic heading, the Sheila mi Tana de Masnisen. Who is the Tana of the Mishnah? You'll note that we have a very long question marking, taking it down about a quarter of the way down Omid Beis. All of this is part of the long question. Diamonds that appear highlight you can see under the Mivneh heading, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. The Fi Kushis HaGemara according to the question that the Gemara presents, mashma de reisha aliba de Rabbi Meir v'seifa k'Rabbi Yehuda, that the first part of the Mishnah, the case 1 that's encircled in the Mishnah, would reflect Rabbi Meir, and the seifa, the continuation of the Mishnah, case 2 of the Mishnah, reflects Rabbi Yehuda. And that is not a comfortable situation when you have an unnamed Mishnah, a Mishnah without any names appearing, then to come along and suggest that it's authored by 2 different Tanoim. This is not a comfortable position to be in. So that constitutes our long question. Now the Gemara, money. Our Mishnah that said, even if he doesn't write the achrayus is that guarantee that a husband must provide to a wife to cover her ksuba, the guarantee that all his properties stand as a guarantee. She has a lien, we'll say, upon all his properties. That's called achrayus. Even if he doesn't write it in, it is understood to be there. That idea is Rebbe Meir He. The Omar. Let's just backtrack for 1 second, please. Correction. We must make a correction. Our Mishnah said that even if he doesn't write the amount that is due to her, the Basula Mosayim and the Almona Mona, she gets it anyway. That aspect, later on we'll get to the issue of the guarantee. But in the meantime, the aspect of the Mishnah that says that even if he didn't write in the 100 and the 200 for the different kinds of women respectively, she gets it, that is Rebbe Meir's opinion. That under all circumstances, she deserves the entire sum. The Omar, Rebbe Meir says, Kol hapoiches lebesula mimasayim, any husband who provides less than 200 for a basula, Almona Mona, less than a 100 for the Almona, Harei Zu Bi'laznus. It would be tantamount to an intimacy of harlotry. Di'i Rebbe Yehuda, if that section of the Mishnah was in accordance with Rebbe Yehuda, there is a possibility of reduction. Ha'omar, Rebbe Yehuda has been known to say, Rotza Kaisei V'Besula Shtasha Masayim, a husband can write to the virgin wife a shtar, a document of 200, in other words, a ksuba of 200 zuz, vehi koiseves, and she would write in response, his kabalti mimcha mona, a receipt, even if she didn't actually receive any payment, she can write such a receipt. And in the final analysis, you have a woman that will be receiving 100, even though she's a basula. Likewise, ulalmona mona, person can write to his widow wife, the wife that he married as a widow, 100. V'hi koiseves, and she writes to him, his kabalti mimcho chamishim zu, I've received from you 50 of the 100. So as far as Rabbi Yehuda is concerned, the opening of the Mishnah would not be appropriate, because according to the opening of the Mishnah, the Basu will always get 200. In other words, the husband cannot give less than that. According to Rav Yehuda, there is an option for him to end up giving less. Amo Seifa. Now we turn to the part we mistakenly mentioned earlier, the Seifa, the section 2 of the Mishnah. The Seifa literally means the end, but it means in the progression of the Mishnah. The following appeared: Kosav lo sode shaveh mona tachas mosayim zuz. The husband assigned toward her ksuba a field worth 100 instead of 200. V'lo kosav lo kol nechosim deisli achroyen l'ksubosech. And he leaves out. He doesn't have written in this phrase the guarantee clause, that all of my property is bound toward your ksuba. And the thinking right now means when he says all of my property is bound toward your ksuba, that means even if after their marriage the husband, were sell properties, she, having been married before those sales, would be able to go to those who purchased land from him and collect that land. She has, in effect, a lien on the property. That's the thinking right now. That all of his property is bound toward her ksuba, empowering her to collect even from purchasers. Purchasers, of course, subsequent to their wedding date. Chayav, the clause is understood anyway, even if it's not written in. Shu Tanai Bezdin. It's a court condition upon which marriages are predicated. Well, this section of the Mishnah, Ason Rabbi Yehuda, is in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda's approach. The Omar, Rabbi Yehuda is known to say, to hold achrayas toi sofer, who the absence of the guarantee clause is automatically assumed to be a mere oversight or a mistake on the part of the scribe, and otherwise it really belongs there. Even if it's not written in, the woman will be entitled to collect from what's called mishubadim. Those are the purchasers, that's the example of the lien she has upon all of the husband's properties from the point that they marry onwards. The Rebbe Meir, if the Mishnah were authored by Rebbe Meir, if this section were authored by Rebbe Meir, Rebbe Meir says that the absence of the achrayas clause is not an indication of a mistake, an oversight on the part of the scribe, but it's deliberate. Desnan, and here we provide the background for that information in this Tanaic source, which continues. You can see down the first 5 lines of Omid Beis, and at the end of the source, the question is repeated, where the Gemara says, Reisha Rabbi Meir v'Sefer Rabbi Yehuda, should we say that? And in the meantime, let's see this source in which the issue of achrayas toi sofer, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, by the way, appears in this source under the name Chachomim. So the source says, Motza shtarei chov, a person finds on the street, he finds some shtarei chov, those are documents indicating debt. Someone borrowed money. It's called loan documents, which in the hands of the creditor enables him to collect money from the borrower. When you find a shtar chov, there's always the possibility that maybe the shtar was paid up, and if you give it to the malveh, he'll be collecting a second time. On the other hand, if it really was paid up, it should have been torn up, not left intact. Anyway, you find these loan documents on the street. We continue at the top of Omid Beis. Im yesh bohen achrayas nechosim, if the guarantee clause is written into the document you found, lo yachzir, don't give it back. Don't give it back to the malveh. Shebased in the mehen, that kind of document in the hands of the malveh will be such that he will be able to collect with it, and it could very well be that the loan was paid up already. And Rashi adds, even if the loveh admits that he is still bound, don't give it back, because it could be part of a type of scheme that's worked out between the malveh and the loveh. So just don't give it back. Ein bohen achrayas nechosim, if the loan document does not have a guarantee clause in it. Now, in the absence of the guarantee clause, so any subsequent purchasers, people who purchased the properties from this borrower after the date in which he took the loan out, they will not be subject to collection. And therefore, we say yachzir, that you can return to the malveh. If the loveh had paid up, so then he should have torn it up. He's simply the fact that the shtar is still intact indicates to us that it hasn't been paid up yet. And the main thing for us right now is that any purchasers are not put up at risk here, are not endangered by having the shtar given back to the creditor. And that's what the Mishnah means. This source means that she'ein bezdin Ephraim, and bezdin is not going to collect on the malva's behalf from any purchasers. Divrei Rebbe Meir. So Rebbe Meir makes a clear distinction between a document in which the guarantee clause appears, and when we say guarantee clause, that means, as we said, anyone who purchased property from this borrower after the date of the loan, they are at risk. If there's no guarantee clause in there, so then they're not at risk. And we're not endangering any innocent third parties by giving the shtar back to the malveh. The Chachomim Oimrim. Rashi explains that the term Chachomim alludes to Rabbi Yehuda and others that go along with him. The Chachomim say Echad zeh ve'echad zeh lo yachzir. Even if it's a shtar that doesn't have achrayas nechosim written in it, doesn't have the guarantee clause, do not give it back to the malveh. Shebezdin nifroimehen. Bezdin will collect from mishubodim, from purchasers, if need be. What is the rationale? The rationale is that even though the clause is absent, it's assumed to have been a mere oversight on the part of the sofer, achrayas to'i sofer, the mistake of the scribe. So now our Mishnah comes out, Reisha Rebbe Meir. The Reisha said that the woman is guaranteed at all times the minimum basic amount, the 200 for the basula, the 100 for the almona, and she cannot receive less than that. And that's the opinion of Rebbe Meir. And the second section of the Mishnah that spoke about a ksuba without the guarantee clause in it is nevertheless understood to have that clause in it. That seems to be like Rebbe Yehuda. And as we said, we don't want to have a Mishnah that has split authorship. V'chitema, you might want to say, or if you try to say Kula Rebbe Meir he, that the whole Mishnah is authored by Rebbe Meir. Vishani, and then what would need explanation? The issue of the guarantee clause. Vishani leila Rebbe Meir ben ksuba l'shtari, and that Rebbe Meir makes a distinction between a marriage document and other financial documents, whereby in a ksuba he will agree that even if the achrayas is not written in, the woman is entitled to collect from the purchasers who purchase property from the husband after their marriage. Umi Shani Le, would Rebbe Meir make such a distinction? Does he make such a distinction? Not so. V'hatanya. We have a Tanaic source, and in this source there's quite a bit of information, but in the context of our Gemara markings Daf Yomi, we're only going to emphasize that which is necessary for our sugya right now, and that you can see is highlighted by the markings, by the special underlining. Chamisha goivin min ha-mechurorin. There are 5 examples of people that collect from mechur. Mechur means from the word ben chorin. Chorin is free properties. Free properties means properties that the individual in debt is currently holding on, not properties that he has already sold. So there are 5 examples whereby you cannot collect from properties that the one who is in debt that had already sold. You can only collect from properties that he's currently holding on, that he's in possession of. And these 5 examples include number 5 in this list, Kesubos isha she'ein bo achrayas, a ksuba that doesn't have the achrayas clause, the guarantee clause written in. Well, in the absence of the guarantee clause, that indicates that she has no lien on any purchasers that purchased. That indicates that the absence of the guarantee clause is no mistake, it's deliberate. And right after the source, you see the Gemara says, Man shamis le dom achrayas lapto sofer. Who is it that is known to say that the absence of the guarantee clause is not a mere oversight, a mere mistake, but it's deliberate? it's Rabbi Meir holds that v'kotoni ksubas isha. Ksubas isha is amongst those examples that we find cannot collect from the mishubadim because the guarantee clause is missing. So that as far as Rabbi Meir is concerned, no distinction is made between a ksuba and other shtaros. So the question will remain at that point. Our Mishnah seems to be authored on the one hand by Rabbi Meir and on the other hand by Rabbi Yehuda. How can that be? So let's read the entire source. Again, we're not going to dwell on the other examples. Chamisha goivin min hamechuroren v'elohein peros u'shvach peros v'makabil olov lozun es ben ishto ubas ishto uveget choiv she'ein bo achrayis. Get chov, by the way, this is worth noting as well. The get chov is a standard loan document. Rashi says kol shtoros nikroin get, so that it's important for us to note that 4 is taught along with 5. Get chov she'ein bo achrayis and ksubas isha she'ein bo achrayis. These are 2 examples of documents whereby the guarantee clause is missing, and as a result of that, party in question cannot collect from the mishubadim. He cannot collect from purchasers. That shows us that the absence of that clause was deliberate, and it's not just an oversight or a mistake, and it's understood as if it's there. So here we have a source in which get chov, number 4 and number 5, get chov again is a regular shtar chov, and a ksubas isha are taught as having the same halacha, and that's why we brought in this source to show that the Shlita, the opinion that holds achrayas is not toy sefer, does not make a distinction between a ksuba and other documents. And who is that Shlita? Man shames leidi omar achrayas lav toy sefer. Who is it that's known to hold that the absence of the guarantee clause is not a mere mistake? Rabbi Meir. It's Rabbi Meir. V'kotani ksubas isha. Together with get chov, he teaches it together with other types of financial documents. So at this point, we've got to figure out authorship of the Mishnah. The Gemara answers, "I boyasema Rabbi Meir, v'i boyasema Rabbi Yehuda." In fact, the Mishnah can be authored by either one of them, and all we have to do is straighten out the section of the Mishnah that didn't conform. If you like, you can say that the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. And then what about the beginning of the Mishnah? Hasam, where Rabbi Yehuda spoke about the woman getting less. Kasvale hiskabalti. She proactively wrote or indicated a receipt that I already received part of the sum. So where the woman proactively indicates that she received part of the sum, so that's it, he doesn't have to pay the rest of it. But in the absence of the woman taking this initiative, even Rabbi Yehuda agrees she has to get the entire sum. In our Mishnah, lo kasvole is kabalti. She didn't write any receipt to the husband. She didn't indicate proactively that she received some. Therefore, she is entitled to receive the entire amount. So that the beginning of the Mishnah can fit into Rabbi Yehuda just as well. And the second section with the achrayas being viewed as toy sefer is also like that's straightforward Rabbi Yehuda. So the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir. You can say that the Mishnah is in accordance with Rabbi Meir, that achrayas. Now, if you say that our Mishnah is in accordance with Rabbi Meir, did he not say that the absence of the achrayas is deliberate? It's not a mistake. And yet, in our Mishnah, it said that if the achrayas is not written in, the husband is nevertheless chayav. Aha! But the word chayav we thought meant the husband and all the properties he sold are bound toward her ksuba, and that is not true. My chayav dikatani. What does chayav mean in the Mishnah? If you need to look for a word in the haystack, there's a little star to the immediate left-hand side of the Gemara. You can go back to Omid Aleph and you'll see where the word appears. The husband had not written in that all of my property is bound toward your ksuba chayav. It doesn't mean chayav, as we said, that she can then go to purchasers, to lakuchais, but rather chayav dekatani, the chayav that is written in means min hamuchurorin, means all the properties that he currently holds at the point that he divorces her, all of those properties are bound toward her ksuba, but not that she can go to go collect from lakuchas. Loi kosav lo v'chulei. Before we continue, we glance at the side under the nosei, the topic heading. Dino shel avur d'Shmuel, the law taught by Avur d'Shmuel. Eishes Yisrael shenensa, a woman married to a Yisrael. And we're mentioning married to a Yisrael, not married. We're not talking about a married to a Kohen, married even to a Yisrael. Shenensa, that's raped, asur l'bayla. Very surprising halacha. If she's raped, she can't go back to her husband. Chayshinon, because we suspect shemot techilasa ba'ines v'seifa b'ratzon. We suspect that she, the initial contact with this, with the low life, with the rapist, was against her will. But as the incident progressed, she acquiesced. That's seifa b'ratzon. That at the end she was in agreement. She did it willingly, and a married woman who has willing extramarital relations thereby prohibits herself to go back to her husband. And as we said, this is a very interesting halacha. It's quite surprising that the concept of a married woman who was raped is being prohibited not just to a Kohen husband, but even to all husbands. The obvious question will be raised in the Gemara. According to Avur d'Shmuel, where then do you ever have a situation where the well-known halacha will apply? The well-known halacha that says a married woman that's raped is not prohibited to her husband outside of Kohanim. Where is that ever going to have any application if you're going to say what you do? That we're suspicious that maybe she acquiesced at the end. The marking that you see, the house marking, is featured under the Mivneh, highlighting Avur d'Shmuel, the Rava Shecholkim Zalzeh. There's a machlokes between these opinions, and hence we highlighted their names accordingly. The Gemara. Omar Avur d'Shmuel, Eishes Yisrael Shenansa, Asura L'Bayla, a wife of a Yisrael, and again, Yisrael means besides a Kohen, even a wife of a non-Kohen that's raped, asura l'bayla, she's forbidden to go back to her husband. Chayshinon shemot chilasa b'oines v'soifa b'ratzon. We're suspicious that maybe at the beginning it was under duress, it was against her will, but at the end she acquiesced. It was willing. She was willing. Eisvei Rav le'avur d'Shmuel. Rav raises a challenge to Avur d'Shmuel from our Mishnah. It says in our Mishnah, Im tishtaboi, if you're taken into captive, and when we speak about captivity, we're talking about Gentile captors and the very strong suspicion that there was rape, and the husband would indicate in the ksuba, if you're taken into captivity, Afrikinoch, I will redeem you, and we dashed on the main phrase, V'isvinoch lilint, and I'll take you back as a wife. Well, so what do we see here? We see that a woman who's raped, a married woman who's raped, goes back to her husband. That's exactly the opposite of what Avur d'Shmuel said. Ishtik! And he had no answer. Now, by the way, we noted that Rav is the one that raised the question. And here you have a very, very interesting observation. Kori Rav, Olei Avur d'Shmuel, Rav referred to Avur d'Shmuel the following pasuk. We should emphasize that Rav, according to Rav, Avur d'Shmuel should have answered him. It's true that Rav raised the question, but it's a question that had an answer to it, and yet Avur Dishmo remained silent. So Rav refers to Avur Dishmo, Sorim Otzru B'milim V'kaf Yosimu Lefihem. The Sorim, the ministers, the important individuals, were withheld or were upheld by words, and they placed their hands over their mouths, meaning they remained silent. The Gemara asks, well, what could he have possibly said? It sounded like a very good question, that a married woman who's raped is allowed to go back to her husband. That's a strong question on Avur Dishmo. What could he have answered? The following. B'shivuya hekelu. Avur Dishmo could have answered that you're asking on my principle from a case of a woman taken into captivity. Within that realm of captive women, we are lenient, and very simply because it's all a matter of mere suspicion. We didn't see her actually in intimacy with the captors. Avur Dishmo's halacha applied to a case where it was known that the woman was raped. In the case of the woman taken into captivity, all we know is that she was taken into captivity. We don't know that anything actually happened. Therefore, under such circumstances, one can be lenient. The Gemara asks, Ulavur d'Shmuel, oines d'Shaya Rachmona. According to Avur d'Shmuel, the onus that the Torah allows, namely allows the wife to go back to her husband, where does it ever manifest itself? Where do you find such a case? Answer: Kagon de Koamri Edim. Witnesses that were witness to the rape could testify Shetzovcha mitchila v'yad sof, that the woman was screaming from beginning to end, stop, whatever, and with that behavior on her part, it's very clear that there was no element of acquiescence, of willingness on her part. And so if you have witnesses that can testify to that effect, that is the case that the married woman would be allowed to go back to her non-Kohen husband. By the way, if we're dealing with a husband that's a Kohen, she's forbidden anyway. That's a law of the Torah, that a wife of a Kohen who was raped is forbidden to go back to her Kohen husband. Upliga de Rava. What we've seen in the name of Avur d'Shmuel is at odds. Rava disagrees with that. The Omar Rava. Kol shetchilot b'oines v'soif b'rotzoin afilu hi omeres hanichu lo shilmolei nizkok li lo yisochroso muteres. What is Rava saying? Any case where the beginning of the contact is through ones is rape. The beginning of the contact with this rapist is through his forcing her, and as the incident progresses, there appears to be rotzon. Rotzon means willingness on her part. Even if she says, Hanichulov, she says, if there are people around, she would say, leave him alone, let him do what he's doing. That if he wouldn't have come to me, I would have gone out and paid him to be with me. Muteris, she is allowed to go back to her husband. My taimo. Why? Is she not a married woman willingly engaging in intimacy with another man? So the Gemara says, because Yetzer al B'Shah. Rashi says, in the lower part of the narrow lines, Yetzer al B'Shah v'gam ze oines. This is also considered beyond her control. Shebetchilas be'ilah, she ba'oines, at the beginning of the action, when it really was under duress. At that point, as the incident started, Hilbisha Aboyel Yetzer, the rapist, will say, planted within her this the evil inclination, or we'll call the Yetzer Hara, which is something that we'll say certainly was not planned by the woman ahead of time. It wasn't premeditated, and hence the whole event is considered ones. Tanya Kavose de Rava. We have a Tanaic source supporting Rava, and we should point out, by way of markings, a series marking appears, triangles appear, and under the Mivneh heading we indicate Gimel Droshes ala Posuk V'hi Lo Nispasa. There are three sources that have a drosha opening with the Posuk that describes a married woman that is party to extramarital relations, and she was not grabbed, she was not raped. So V'hi Lo Nispasa means, and if she wasn't raped, that's what the pasuk says, and then the result of that is, we know Asura, that she is forbidden to go back to her husband. And in these sources, in each one of these sources, there's going to be a phrase, you'll see a dashed underlining, Yoitzim v'yoitzim min haklal. They are exceptions to the rule. So in the meantime, we have a source that supports Rava. The pasuk says, V'hi lo nispasa. If she was not raped, the result of that is asura. She is also, a married woman was not raped, and it was participant in extramarital relations, is asura, forbidden to go back to her husband. Ha nispasa, if she was raped, muteres, she's allowed to go back to her husband. V'yesh l'cha acheres, there is another kind of woman, another case, shafa pishin nispasa asura. Even if she was raped, she cannot go back to her husband. V'yezo, what is that? Zu Ashes Kohen. That's the case of the wife of a Kohen. So we have this source that says that the Ashes Yisrael that's raped is mutter to go back to her husband. As far as Avu Adishmal is concerned, he said that Eish Yisrael that's raped is also to go back to her husband, so that this source supports Rava. We continue. Tanya Idach, another source, opening with the same pasuk. V'hi lo nispasa, if she was not raped, the result of that is asura, she's also to her husband. Ha nispasa, we can infer though. I must ask for you. I must apologize to all of the listeners. I made a serious error in the reading. So let us go back. Again, I seek your apologies. Let us go back to the fourth wide line. Tanya Kavase de Rava. The Brisa opens up with V'hi lo nispasa asura. Ha nispasa muteres. If she was raped, she's allowed to go back to her husband. There's another example, even if she wasn't raped, muteres, she's allowed to go back to her husband. What do you mean? What is that? That a woman that's not raped? In other words, there's willingness. She's allowed to go back to her husband. What which one is that? Zu kol shetchilasa ba'onis v'seifa b'ratzon. Any case that it began as a rape, even though at the end it was biratzon, it was with willingness on her part, as we described before under Rava, she is allowed to go back to her husband. And that's what we meant before when you have a Tanaic source supporting Rava. Here it's black and white, and now we continue in the Gemara. Tanya idach v'hi lo nispasa asura. If the woman, a married woman, was not raped and willingly experienced extramarital relations, asura, that's forbidden to her husband. Oh, nispasa, if she was raped, muteres, she's allowed to go back to her husband. V'yesh l'cha acheres, there's another example of a woman, she'af al pi shenispasa, even if she was raped, asura, she is forbidden to her husband. V'yezo, and which one is that? Zu Ashes Kohen, that's the wife of a Kohen. Omar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Mishum Rabbi Yishmael. Here you have another drasha on V'hi lo nispasa, but it's not in a Tanaic. It's not presented as a Tanaic source, even though it is brought in the name of Tanoim. But that's why you don't see a frame around this. It's said in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, V'hi lo nispasa asura. If she was not raped, but rather was a willing partner, so she's also to go back to her husband. Ha nispasa muteres. If she would have been raped, she'd be allowed to go back to her husband. V'yesh locha acheres. There's another example. Shafal pi shelo nispasa muteres. That even if she was not raped, she's allowed, she's muteres. In other words, she is not going to be forbidden to her husband. Now we're going to have to explain that a little bit more in a moment when we go on. But we have a case of a woman that was not raped, and muteres, the fact that she was, let's say, a willing partner with this this extramarital relationship, it doesn't impose upon her a prohibition to the husband, to her husband. V'yezo, what's that case? Zu shekidusha kidushay tois. This is a case where her marriage to her husband turned out to be a mistake. In other words, imagine the following. A man married a woman on conditions, specified conditions. And let's say the conditions, in order to determine whether the conditions we met or not, it would take 2 years to see whether or not those conditions would be met or not. After a year of marriage, she has an affair with another man. And eventually when the 2-year mark comes, the original conditions of her marriage to her husband were not met. So if the entire marriage, which was predicated on some type of t'nai, on some kind of condition, and the condition was not met, so then she is retroactively considered never having been married to her husband. In the interim period, as we described, she happened to have an affair with another man. If at some point she wants to, after that affair, she wants to go back to her husband and marry him, she'd be allowed to. It's not considered a case of a married woman having had an affair with another man, which prevents her permanently from ever going back to her husband. Because in this case, the original marriage, as we said, was a mistake. The conditions were never fulfilled. And the Gemara goes on to describe how far we go with this idea. Shafilu b'na murkav al kseifa, even if she has a child from the original husband, and we realize now that the conditions of their original marriage were never met, she says, I don't want to stay with you, and walks off without even the need for a get. A get, a divorce document, is only to undo an actual marriage, a binding marriage. But here there was no actual marriage, as we discovered retroactively. Omar Rav Yehuda, Hani Noshi de Ganvu Ganvi, women that are kidnapped by thieves, Sharion Leguvrayu, they are allowed to go back to their husbands, because if there was any illicit behavior, you can rest assured it was forced upon the women. It was ones. It was equivalent of a rape. Amri le Rabbanon le Rav Yehuda. The Rabbanon asked Rav Yehuda, V'ha'ka mamtion luhu nama. But we know that when these thieves kidnap the women and they take them from place to place, the women captives, they serve their captors with bread. Mamtion means they bring to them nama, bread. So it seems that they're getting on all right with them, that they're willing partners. No, machmas yira. That behavior is only a function of their fear that if they don't cooperate, they will pay heavily. But giri. We know that when these bandits that kidnap the women are in battle with others, these women captives prepare arrows for them. They hand them their arrows for shooting. So you see cooperation between the women captives and the captors. No, that's also machmas yira. It's only out of a sense of fear. So when the women are eventually released, they can go back to their husbands. Vadai, however, if the following situation arises, Shavkinon v'azlon minavshayu, if the women are released, if the bandits release the women to go home now, and they go right back to these ganovim, to these bandits on their own, minavshayu means on their own, then asiran. Then that shows us that they were in fact willing partners, and they are forbidden to their husbands. Now, as we go on in the Gemara, we have some markings that we want to pay attention to, and on the side under the Nosei, Mivneh heading, a diamond appears, Yishuv Stira Bein Shtei Braisos Binyan Heter Noshim Lebalein. We're going to present two Tanaic sources. One appears in the frame. The second, after the second diamond, you see the word Ibcha. That means the opposite. In other words, you have to imagine a Tanaic source like the first one, but just taught in the opposite fashion. So you have two Tanaic sources that seem to be contradictory. Now we turn to the Gemara. Tonu Rabbanan. Shivuye Malchus. It's an expression. We're not going to translate it immediately. We just say, you just read it as Shivuye means captive women taken by the king, the government. Harei hein kishivuyin. They have the status of captive women. These are women that were taken captive for intimacy purposes, and they have the status of shvuyin. They're allowed to go back to their husbands. Genuve listus. Listus is a term referring to bandits, women that were kidnapped by bandits. They are not einon kishvuyin. They don't have the din of shvuyin, of captive women. And the result of that is that they are prohibited to go back to their husbands. V'hatanya, but have we not learned ibcha, the opposite, which then says that the shvuye malchus, those women are asuros to their husbands, and the genuve listus women are mutaros to their husbands. The Gemara answers malchus malchus lo kasha. There is no contradiction per se. Ha b'malchus Achashverosh, ha b'malchus ben Netzer. Malchus Achashverosh is representative of an imperial ruler, a king of a massive kingdom. Women that are taken captive for tashmish, for sexual purposes, by a king like that. Any given woman knows that this massive king isn't going to marry them, isn't going to keep them, and therefore the whole contact between this high level imperial figure and the woman is just a mere act of rape. It's a mere act of onus. She can't resist. He's a king. He's got court executioners at his beck and call. So that intimacy is an intimacy of onus, of rape. However, if it's Malchus ben Netzer, if we take a look at Rashi in the wide lines, almost halfway down the wide lines under the Gemara, ben Netzer listim hoya, he's a bandit. The Lokar Ayoros, he wasn't a small time petty thief. He captured cities, umalach aleim. And he controlled them. He ruled over different cities. V'naseh roish listim, and he became known as the head of the mob. Ubedidei tnan, regarding him, we are taught that shvuei malchus einan kishvuei v'asuros lebalein. These kind of women that are captured by the likes of a Ben Netzer. He's not a major imperial ruler. He's a local. Again, he's not a petty thief, but he's a local or regional criminal. They are asur sabayan. The savra, she figures, a woman captured by this kind of character figures minsiv kod nosiv law, that he's actually interested in marrying me, v'nivelis baratzon, and she'll be maybe she's impressed with that. She wants to cooperate, make a good impression, because she feels that he'll actually marry her. So there, we suspect the element of ratzon on her part, a willing intimacy, and that will prohibit this married woman from going back to her husband. So the two sources are not contradictory. In the first source, it says Shvuei Malchus, the women are allowed to go back to their husbands. That's when the Malchus is a major imperial dynasty, and the king himself had relations with the woman. The woman isn't going to be a willing partner with the hopes of her being married by. The guy's got millions of women at his beck and call. The second source that says the Shvuei Malchus or Asuros, that's because you're dealing with this smaller time local or regional thug that the woman has hopes of or considers that he would marry her. Listus al listus lokasha, the two sources seem to be in conflict with one another regarding a woman taken captive by bandits. Ha beven netzer, ha belistim ba'alma. Ben Netzer, you see the name appears again in the source that indicated that she's asura in the case of Genuvei Listus. That would be in the first source where Genuvei Listus appeared and she's considered asuros. That's because the bandit is a bandit like Ben Netzer, a regional thug, and the source that indicated that the Genuvei Listus, she's muteris, the Ipcha source, that's a petty thief. That's listim de'alma. In the case of listim de'alma, she's repulsed by him. He's disgusting in her eyes. Could say in contrast with the Ben Netzer case, he's a man of standing, if you will, even though it's in the negative light. Nevertheless, as Rashi indicates, she'll feel, I'm an Ashes Melech, I'm the wife of the king of the mob. So it's a certain standing that she has. It would encourage her to want to be with him. But a low-life petty thief, he's disgusting in her eyes. So any contact between any illicit intimacy with him is still viewed as an act of rape. No willingness on her part. The Gemara asks, in the course of resolving these sources, when you focus on Ben Netzer, in one place he's called a Malchus, in another place he's called a Listus, a thief. Malchus is a king, in another place called thief. So the Gemara asks, Ben Netzer, Hasam Korile Melech, in source Beis, he's called a Melech, and V'hacha, in source Aleph, Korile Listim, he's called a bandit. The Gemara says, it's not that we're seeing double over here, that's correct. It's all a matter of relativity. Gabi Achashverosh, when taught in the context of an imperial ruler like Achashverosh, so Ben Netzer is small time, Listim, who is called a bandit. Gabi Listim Dalma, but in contrast to a petty thief, Ben Netzer Melech, he is like a king.